But there was this whole mystical movement going on in Spain and France amongst the Jews and amongst everyone, amongst the Gnostics, amongst the Christians. And it immediately became Christian Kabbalah, and he used Kabbalah to prove that Jesus was the Messiah.
This is Monica Perez here with a returning guest and an absolute fan favorite, the great Robert Frederick of the Hidden Life is Best podcast, which explores the many, many tendrils of Francis Bacon. May or may not be Shakespeare, definitely the smartest man who ever lived, trademark. and how that affects us today. So in case people haven't heard you on my show before, which most people have, but tell a little bit about your podcast, and then let's get into your most recent episode.
Okay, so my podcast is called Francis Bacon and the Gnostic English Empire, The Hidden Life is Best. So you can find it if you put any of that in. I use Apple Podcasts, but it's easy to find. I've done 8 episodes, almost done with the 9th. And I had this synchronicity thinking about, I was already onto the English Empire as causing most of the problems in the world. And I had this crazy synchronicity, which I discussed in episode 8, that led me to Francis Bacon. And just started digging into him, and it was just incredible that he was connected to practically everything in the modern world, from his daytime, the things that people know about him that are accepted historically, that he's the originator of modern science as a philosopher. And if you look up the Enlightenment era, which followed the Renaissance, which followed medieval era, as historians call it, he's considered to be the beginning of the Enlightenment.
What year was he alive?
He lived from 1561 to 1626.
So you discovered the English Empire, and I've just been reading a book called The Fabian Milner Conspiracy.
Yeah.
And so that was like around World War I. That's where it changed the world. And I would say it really is the pivot point in the modern world. I imagine that's a direct descendant of Francis Bacon's plottings.
Yeah, no doubt. I do want to get up to that. The Fabians are key for kind of putting out these woke ideas, really, and these socialistic ideas. They were socialists, and I don't really know a whole lot about them, but...
Well, let's talk about that in a later episode. I'm sure you'll get to it, but it just ties in with my most recent shows, and so this is very interesting to me because I'm always curious about the origins. It
all extends back to this time period, the Tudors, the fascinating Tudor era, Henry VII, Henry VIII.
And what years again? What did you say about Francis Bacon?
Francis Bacon was 1561. Elizabeth I took the throne in 1558 when Henry VIII died. And Henry VII seized the crown in the 1470 or 1480 from Richard III. And that's the Tudor era.
That's a Shakespeare play, which I'm sure Francis Bacon wrote.
And Bacon wrote, demonizing Richard III.
Of course. I could predict that, and I don't even know Richard III.
There's a great movie out. Hopefully it will be streaming soon. With Steve Coogan, the comedian, made this great movie about a true story about a woman who found where Richard III was buried. It's an incredible story. It's a really fun, really well-made, smart movie.
Wow.
And they exposed the Tudor propaganda. They actually exposed the Shakespeare propaganda. It's fascinating.
Wow. Well, I'll see if I can track that down.
It's called The Lost King.
I'm going to put that in the show notes.
Highly recommended. I don't know if it's streaming yet.
Okay, well, I'll find it just so people have
it's great movie. Right? And it's got this stuff in it about what they did, how the Tudors seized power with propaganda, how Shakespeare was very intense Tudor propaganda.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I can't wait. Oh, I love that kind of thing. So, I guess what I feel like we've talked before, and I still don't have a complete handle on Gnosticism as it relates to Francis Bacon. And my biggest problem is that there are a couple of people I know, podcasters I respect, people who listen to me, who are embracing Gnosticism now and feel like your representation is unfair. And I wonder if it's been redefined. How can good people get it wrong, or what? Is it possibly defensible?
Well, what happened was a book came out in the 70s that everyone read. It was a big hit. It was called The Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels.
I read that.
You
Yes.
did.
Yes.
And it makes Gnosticism seem hip, seem way hipper than, staid old judgmental Christianity. And she glosses over the key part of Gnosticism. It's the only thing that connects all the different Gnostic sects. And that is this idea, and it's actually their only original religious idea, is that the God that made this world was an evil demiurge, and his sole purpose of making this world was to trap our souls here. And our souls are trapped here unless we get gnosis, meaning knowledge in Greek, so that we don't have to be reincarnated here.
All right, you're blowing my mind, especially because in your most recent episode, you bring out, I thought it was in a fascinating way, about how we are electromagnetic beings. And
Yeah.
we know that. We know our brains are like that. We know our hearts are like that. We know that the earth is a giant spinning magnet, which is an electricity machine, an electricity generator. And your argument is, in order for our bodies to be able to host our souls, we need to be connected directly to the electromagnetic atmosphere of the earth. So even going to the moon wouldn't work. Like, that's too far away.
Yes.
So are you saying that that feature is a demonic setup?
No, I think it's just part of the structure of the earth, like the miracle, the gazillions of miracles that make up daily life is electromagnetic, and the earth is the electromagnetic source of all of that, and our bodies are really part of the earth. And I don't think we can leave the earth very far. I think we can maybe go up to the space station. Some people think the space station is fake. I know the moon landings were faked.
I mean, I have no doubt about that either.
Yeah.
But these people think you can. Why do they miss that? These supposed scientismists, how did they miss that? Because that seems self-evident to me, like a serious risk.
Yes. I don't know. I think it's a dream that got put into us as a possibility, I suppose. And then it's been drummed into us since, Flash Gordon and then Star Trek. And then we just grew up with it. And it just seems possible because, hey, why not? But it's actually extremely unlikely.
The way you put it, like, it was such an aha moment for me, because I thought, all right, so what they decided to do, what they're telling us, is they put human organisms with a complex brain, even if there's no soul, which I think is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Consciousness is beyond the physical. So they put them in a little metal ball, and they shot it out of the medium. So I feel like if you took a fish and you put it in a bowl of water and then shot it into, it would definitely die, because that what's in that water, like, it matters to that fish. Like, it's a currents and the oxygen and the replenishment. And yes, they give us the oxygen or whatever in the air, but the entire medium, it seems to have its own nature. Like, our atmosphere isn't just air. You're right. Electricity is in that atmosphere, sunlight. And it just seems to me that you would have to make an accommodation for that. And I've never heard them say they did.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's kind of an original idea of mine.
It's fantastic.
Just the fact that, we haven't been to the moon. It's another thing, like the Shakespeare hoax. If you look at it for half an hour at the evidence, the negative evidence that Shakespeare could not possibly have written these plays, you can be convinced. There's a half-hour video on YouTube with Diana Price. There's a 45-minute of Mark Twain talking about it. And you look at the evidence, you're like, yeah, there's no way he wrote those plays. The evidence was just never presented to people before until, the mid-1800s. And now it's so much easier to disseminate information that if you're curious and you're open-minded and you're not invested in the myth, you can go like, yeah, no way Shakespeare wrote those plays. To convince you that Francis Bacon wrote them is another step in the journey.
But you can with the Northumbria manuscript. But one thing I want to say is like that idea that all you need to do is question the foundational assumption. And that is so true for so much. So I've said that about like the necessity of government.
Yeah.
I've gone through a very long process of trying to figure out, like, I wasn't allowed to ask the question, is government even necessary? That's not a question that was ever asked in 7th grade when we were deciding on which is the best form of government. Right. And now I had to go through all that myself. And maybe I'm coming back around to, I think we're probably going to end up with government, whether you like it or not. You're probably going to get it. I don't know. I'm not 100% convinced of that yet. But the same thing with the existence of God. They say when you look back hundreds of years, the question of whether or not there was a God, like prior to Darwin, was something that was almost unthinkable. Like, what else could the explanation be? But it was just a question that they didn't even address in order to conclude, like the Greeks did. But I feel like, that more recently there was maybe that's Dark Ages is probably a misnomer, but anyway, so it's sometimes just questioning your basic assumption. And I find that 9 out of 10 times, if you ask somebody why they think something, it will be because I saw these black squiggles on a page and they gave me that idea.
Yeah.
And that's it. There's no like induction at all.
Yeah. You just don't even bother thinking about it.
Mm-mm.
It's not a possibility.
So the Northumberland manuscripts, though, I think that you said it was like undeniable, the parallelism between Francis Bacon's writings and Shakespeare. So I feel like you could make the argument. I think you do make a convincing argument.
There is some great arguments out there. The better one, the Northumberland manuscript is big, but the better one is called the Promus Notebook, Promus, which means storehouse in Latin. And it wasn't found till the mid-1800s by a woman named Constance Pott, who was one of the big pushers of the Baconian theory. And it's in Bacon's handwriting, and it contains thousands of notes that playwrights and writers put down. You get an idea, you put it down to save it. And there's a man named N.B. Coburn, he must have been a retired lawyer, but he must have spent 30 years writing this book called The Bacon Shakespeare Question. That's not the exact title, but N.B. Coburn. Sadly, the book is out of print. He found 750 direct links between this notebook and the Shakespeare plays. Constance Pott found like 1,500. And then there are hundreds of parallels between Bacon's other writings, because he wrote about philosophy and everything. He pretty much wrote about everything, and people have found really close connections between his writings and Shakespeare. But the Promus Notebook and the Northumberland manuscript are really smoking guns, besides the fact that he was suspected of being Shakespeare from the very first Shakespeare poem ever published. In those days, they would answer each other in poems, like answer songs. It would be an answer poem. And they were saying, oh, you must be, encoded poetic.
Yeah. I smell bacon.
Yeah. Ooh, tasty poem. And it's just been going on, It really caught fire in the mid-1800s. So it's almost 200 years of sustained interest in Francis Bacon as Shakespeare. And the only, to my mind, and then the next show I'm going to detail the evidence and just make it really convincing. The only thing is who else knew about it, who was involved, and who else helped write it. Because I think there was a group, and I think a sizable number of people knew about it. I think Queen Elizabeth knew about it. And I think it was known as Tudor propaganda. They were great propagandists. They were great image makers already. I mean, just to hold on to power.
Elizabeth probably fostered it.
Helped. Yeah, she probably helped. She loved the play. She knew Latin inside and out. She was very smart. She was fun loving. I think they had a great time with it.
And she might have been his mother.
I'm 100% convinced that Queen Elizabeth was Francis Bacon's mother.
Nice.
100% convinced.
See, I like the way you phrase that. You're careful with your words. You are 100% convinced.
Yes.
Like, I feel that way about a lot of things too. It doesn't mean you can 100% approve, but it carries a lot to me after all your research that you are 100% convinced.
Yeah, it really helps solidify his psychology. Like, why was he so intense?
Mm-hmm.
And the circumstantial evidence around it is very, very strong from every angle, like who his father was, why those two were together, why Elizabeth and Robert Dudley were together, and what happened to them, and how they wound up, and how they stayed in touch all those years, and the weird psychology of he was actually in line to be king. He was the natural issue of the queen.
What?
He should have been king. And that kind of gets into Hamlet. Hamlet should have been king.
Can you have a bastard king if your mother is the queen? Like, it sounds right. It sounds like you can.
They rewrote the law.
It's the mother.
It was supposed to be the lawful issue. Meaning you couldn't use a bastard. But they changed it to they changed the law at some point. I don't know the exact year. To the natural issue of the monarch, meaning Francis Bacon could become king.
Wow. I mean, any bastard could then.
Any bastard could with natural issue. And I think that meant that they were considering Francis Bacon as king, that it was being bandied about. And I think there was a faction that wanted him to be king. And the other weird part, because I don't go here, but they think that this guy, the Earl of Essex, might have been her other son by the same husband. Apparently they were secretly married, Robert Dudley and Queen Elizabeth.
But didn't Dudley have a wife?
Dudley eventually got married and actually became the Earl of Leicester and actually raised this Earl of Essex, who people think.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, and I haven't looked into that in detail. But a lot of people who believe the Bacon was son of Queen Elizabeth also believe that the Earl of Essex was his brother. And one of the most famous stories of the Tudor era is called the Essex Rebellion. And when Queen Elizabeth was 68 or 69, very near the end of her reign, getting weak, getting sick, she had forbidden all talk of succession. Nobody knew who was going to be the next king. And it was driving everyone crazy, but she was such a brilliant statesperson. She had forbidden all talk of that because she knew a faction would develop around whoever was next, and it would probably kill her because that's how things were done in those days. And there's a very, very famous story. It's called the Essex Rebellion, where tension had developed between the Earl of Essex and the Queen, who had formerly been favorites. It seemed like they were very, very close. And he raised a small army and tried to march on the castle and tried to bring the people of London to cause a rebellion, because he was very popular. He was dashing and handsome and all around the place. And he was very close with Bacon. Bacon was his closest advisor. And the rebellion failed, and he got locked up in the tower and eventually lost his head. And there's a movie about it. It's such a famous story. There's a very famous movie about it because it's it's considered one of the great romances of all time. Apparently, some people think they were lovers, which I think means he wasn't her son. Let's hope they weren't that weird.
They call that genetic attraction, I think. Like, that's definitely going to be a thing.
Could have been.
Oh, De Vere was also in the Shakespeare Project, supposedly, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, De Vere? Yeah. Well, that's a whole other question, which I'll get to in a sec, about the
We still have
Earl
to get to
The
The
Gnostic
stuff,
thing.
the Kabbalah stuff. We still have to get to the. I haven't even asked the question that the show is about yet.
These are all these huge, huge, fascinating topics, each one. But anyway, I just quickly to finish this story, one of the most famous Bacon researchers in America right now, I won't name, told me that he thinks the Earl of Essex was raising the rebellion and had been giving pressure on Elizabeth to force her to name Bacon as king.
Oh.
And I thought that makes a lot of sense to me because
Yeah.
Bacon had remained unmarried.
Yeah.
And the reason, then he got married, the minute Queen Elizabeth died, his life changed completely. He was doing almost nothing. He had no titles, no job even. He was a lawyer, but he didn't do anything. The minute Elizabeth died, he got married. He married a commoner, and he was knighted by James I. So apparently Elizabeth's last words were, "Let it be James." James
yeah. Sure, of course.
That's what she said.
Who reported the last words? That's what I always wonder. Like, who are, I know James was there. It's like, I was there. I swear she said that. But let me ask you. So at that moment, were Shakespeare plays, did they continue to be put out to pace? Because it sounds like he had more free time before.
He did. And those years match up perfectly with the Shakespeare plays. Like one of the reasons I got so into this is a great book by William Smedley or somebody Smedley called the Mystery of Francis Bacon. And he details this whole period of Bacon's life where nobody knows what he was doing. And in fact, the last major biography of him, it runs 700 pages. It's really a joke, but it's called The Hostage to Fortune. I read it twice. They don't give you anything about what he was doing in those years. They sort of fluff up these minor positions he held in Parliament. Like Jesus, and especially like the biographies of William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
They literally know nothing about William Shakespeare between birth and 18, and then nothing until he showed up in London. And they just say, well, he must have
been at the Italian court because he knew an awful lot about that.
So they just kind of made up stuff or just ignore it. And then suddenly Bacon's life, when Elizabeth dies, is packed. He starts writing all these books of philosophy. He gets a very high position in government. He actually becomes the Attorney General, then Lord Chancellor, publishes, timeless works of philosophy. And
was Marlowe in the project?
A lot of people think so. There's even a faction of Marlovians who think that Marlowe was Shakespeare. That's another crazy story because he died very young, but there's a lot of mystery around his death. And even I think the Oxford Shakespeare whatever has now decided that Marlowe helped with 3 plays.
Wow. All right.
So yeah,
That's a start.
I think Marlowe probably was involved, absolutely. And whether he died or not when they say he died, who knows? He could have and still worked on the plays.
Okay. I want to get back to the Gnostic question, and then I want to talk about your latest episode, which addresses my fundamental question there is, what is the difference between the Talmud, the Torah, the Old Testament, and the Kabbalah, and where do we go from there? But first, just to put a nail in the Gnostic thing, I did read Elaine Pagel's. I read basically after that, I was so fascinated by it. I read everything that she wrote. And I even went and got the direct transliteration of the Gospel of Thomas, the Nag Hammadi text. And I found that she completely made so much of it up. The actual transliteration from the scrolls to you just take the words and translate them. She put so much more into her narrative than I could track down with primary sources.
Interesting. Fascinating.
And I wouldn't swear that I didn't, make a scholarly endeavor, but I just, as a drive-by amateur, I was I tossed it after that. I was totally enamored with her stuff. And then after that, I was like, I'm not connecting these dots. But she did make me think that Gnosticism, as I understood it from after I read her, was that it was about to know that God, because I thought, how can God hold you to such a high standard that you could be at risk of eternal damnation if you did not have some internal compass that would allow you. And that's when I started to realize anyway that God had to give you a reason and an understanding of right and wrong and free
Yeah.
will, or he could not hold you accountable. And then I thought, well, perhaps he's embedded this all within us so that we are responsible for right and wrong. So my interpretation of it is totally different from what it seems like the actual application of Gnosticism is. And maybe that's what the modern people who I know and respect who are interested in this, maybe they either misunderstand it or maybe it's been redefined. Like I would say Pagels is really redefining it.
She kind of has, I think, it's a complicated question. She glossed over the negative aspects of Gnosticism. She made it seem really appealing and much more appealing than Catholicism or Protestantism. And very purposely, it's very odd because there's two really negative aspects to Gnosticism. One of them is that they think the God of this world is evil and that this place is a prison, which leads to usually one of two outcomes. One is that you become completely libertine and ignore all laws, all rules, all moral strictures.
Antinomian?
Antinomian.
I had to look that up after
Yeah.
listening to your show.
Antinomian, or you become like very pure and monkish because you don't want to participate in the world at all. So in some respects, it's not that different than, Hinduism and Buddhism and even Christianity. There is an element of that in these religions but it's not that the world is evil, it's that the world will corrupt you. You want to stay pure and develop your soul. So the highest form of Buddhism is sitting in a cave and meditating. They revere those people.
Christianity too. You have cloistered people. You have
monks, exactly.
Hermits. You have you have the mystics. You have silence. All of that. That's true.
All that stuff. And there's an overlap. Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity all kind of share that overlap with Gnosticism. Like it's not that much different, but then the Gnostics go one step more and declare the entire world to be evil and God to be evil. So they really hate Yahweh. They hate the God of the Bible, but they revere Jesus because they think Jesus was giving them that message. They interpret the message of Christ as saying, don't be of this world because the world is evil, and I will give you knowledge, I will give you gnosis, and what I'm bringing you is knowledge so you can escape this planet.
Interesting.
Kind of
wow.
weird,
Yeah, that would be a convolution, I think. That is obviously not my understanding of what Jesus was saying, but you did point out that he brought that magic, which they thought, we call them miracles, prayer and miracles, like the power of prayer, the miracles that Jesus performed. I can see how
he was a magician, right?
Yeah. I've asked people, I've had to define religion for people. Like, are you religious? I've asked people, like, are you religious? Like, I don't know. Yeah, kind of, whatever. And I'm like, okay, let me just ask you this. Do you think that appealing to a power outside this earth can affect this earth? Like, do you think there's power of prayer? Do you think that people can be cursed? Like, that if you don't think there's any connection, then yes, I can see why you don't really care about answering that question. But if somebody says like, yes, I think there's power of prayer, I'm like, okay, that's the dividing line for me. But that is all. I can see how that then spills. So like I was taught that mediums and stuff are real, like they can communicate, but it's the devil, so you're not allowed to use it.
Right.
So we recognize it. We do recognize it, but we think we understand the difference between good and evil through the church.
Yes.
So now Elaine Pagels came out around the time, I don't think it was the 70s. I think it was later. Maybe it was just republished later during that Dan Brown era.
Yeah.
Right. I forget the name of his books, but like Tom Hanks played it, whatever. But they were super critical of the Vatican and everything. And they all of that. So I've read that the Vatican was infiltrated by all this stuff anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
So it's hard for me, I feel like the church is the people, so I don't get too bent out of shape about Vatican corruption because I think we're still going strong, but there's definitely a possibility there. Okay, so tell me about What is the difference between the Talmud, the Torah, the Old Testament, and Kabbalah?
Let me just mention one more thing, because there's two things. She also glossed over. She made Gnosticism look more accepting, and especially for women, and women could be preachers, but it's actually the opposite. Gnosticism is an extremely elitist religion. And if you have the gnosis, you are better than those that don't have the gnosis.
Yes.
And you deserve power. Eventually that corrupts you and you think you should be running the show.
Okay. This was another note from your most recent thing, is that theme runs through more things than you would think. So I've noticed that, like Judaism, it's the chosen people. And then some Christians will say, yes, we accepted the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. So now we are the chosen people.
Yes.
Then you have like the Aryans and the Nazis, like those are chosen people. Anytime you read the English stuff, I'm with you there. Like they obviously, even if they never say it, is very clear.
They're the chosen ones,
that they are above, I'm not saying regular rank and file, but like, the English Empire as run by the kings and queens, like they feel like they are otherworldly.
They come out and say it. Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of people think that they're chosen people, but since a lot of those groups were mentioned in your show, do you feel, and you also said that Kabbalah is the root of like most cults, or do you feel like that chosen people thing all stems from Gnosticism, or no, because the Hebrew chosen thing was predated it? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it stems from the Old Testament.
I mean, it's one thing to think you're the chosen people. It doesn't necessarily mean you think you're superior. In a way, Judaism thinks they're saving the whole world. Like if they can stay pure, we can redeem the whole world, is one way I've heard it stated. And so it's like being the teacher's pet. Like, the teacher's going to be harder on you because, expect more from you. And they'll let other people slack off, but they'll come down on you because they expect more out of you.
Yes.
You have to live pure. And what I've seen recently, I discovered so much in this deep dive in the Kabbalah, is that it seemed like Judaism was trying to cleanse the occult. It was trying to wipe out the hidden. Like, you want to know about Judaism? Here it is in the book. You want to know about the Elysian mysteries? Yeah, you got to go in the cave. You got to get accepted, and then you got to do a 6-day initiation and go in the cave. Yeah.
You're blowing my mind again, because I feel like Jesus had one of those things too, in that he ended the double ethic.
Yeah.
It's like, that's it. There's no more double ethic. You don't have to be inside the club to be treated like a human being.
Exactly. Jesus accepted everyone. It was the opposite of Gnosticism.
Right.
Anyone, you're all welcome, even the wealthy, even the tax collectors, even
and you really give up your power when you do that.
Yeah.
Your power as someone who has a cult following, like you have no power if they have to believe in the power of the message. So interesting. So
fascinating.
To write down the Bible, the Old Testament, is a revelation. It's a generosity. It's a give. It's to give the truth.
It's the opposite of a cult. A cult means hidden. Here it is. Read the book. We're not looking for converts. But you can convert if you want. But they also were a non-ecumenical religion, I think is the word. They weren't advertising, come be a Jew. Not like the Christians are like, you got to be a Christian,
And proselytizing, non-proselytizing.
They weren't proselytizing. They were concerned about being pure and leading a pure life.
Which could be... that goes with some of my immigration observations over the past. Like, before there was a safety net, you didn't need the barriers to immigration because people were opting in, and it was hard work.
Yeah.
It was hard work to opt in 100 years ago to come to this country and sink or swim.
Yeah.
So if you have that in itself is a barrier to entry. It's hard to convert to Judaism. You're allowed, but you would have to demonstrate that level of commitment. Interesting.
Yeah. And this is what hit me, is that, the beginning of Judaism is when they ended child sacrifice. The milieu where Judaism came out of, there was temple prostitution, all this kind of crazy sex rituals, all these mystery religions that were occulted, child sacrifice. And they ended it. That's the beginning of Judaism. Stop with it. You can't drink blood. No more drinking of blood. That's in the Bible.
I do that all the time. So wait, time out.
Why did they have to say that?
Sorry, no, wait, you're going too fast. This is So I have noticed that. I remember reading that basically all ancient religions had human sacrifice. Like the vast majority of when religions started getting sophisticated or civilizations, they had human sacrifice. I don't get it. They had animal sacrifice. I don't know how that was communicated across the world that like
Yeah.
different places in the world had it, but supposedly they did. And I said, wow, Judaism must have had it because that Abraham Isaac story is whack. Like you would never, ever. I mean, what God would you ever follow who tells you to slaughter your firstborn son unless that was something accepted? And then, of course,
Yes.
Jesus is the slaughter of the firstborn son is sacrificed. And
To end all sacrifices.
oh, okay. Well, then, so Christians did it too. So you're saying Abraham and Isaac was an end of the
End
sacrifice,
of child
but
sacrifice.
Jesus, I guess, felt like, I mean, to pull your message forward might be it didn't work or what? Like, how do those two bookends work together
I
for
think
you?
that's beyond my pay grade to
Yes,
really
fair enough. Fair enough.
understand.
I was a little nervous asking the question.
Christian
So
sacrifice.
if you think
I
you
guess
can answer it.
sacrifice to end all sacrifices, redeem all humanity. It's really fascinating, but a lot of those occultic ideas crept back into Christianity because, as we'll get to with the Kabbalah, you kind of can't keep it out because the Bible forbids divination, forbids astrology, it forbids magic. It's like they're really trying to like clean things up. I think it was a reformist movement, like Christianity was a reform of Judaism, Buddhism was a reform of Hinduism, and they were kind of like, this is crazy what's going on around here. Like, we got to clean things up, and that's all in the Bible.
Yeah, the first half of the Old Testament is about like habits,
Yeah.
cleanliness and how you're supposed to live and, marriage and procreation and
Rules.
yeah, the quality of the grain that you leave for the priest. And it's just, I've
A
been
lot of them are
listening to
good
it.
rules. Yeah,
It's
like
hard
you
to stay
can't,
awake.
if you harvest your field, you can't take everything. Like there's going to be pieces you forgot. You've got to leave those for the poor. There's a lot of rules for that, for helping others, because they needed a well-functioning society. They had to have those 10 rules. Don't sleep around. Don't cover
Yeah.
your neighbor's wife. Damn it, you can't do that.
That's what I think about Opus Dei and Franco. Like
Uh-huh.
they were, I think that they, like if Opus Dei, they like work as prayer kind of thing, if I understand correctly. I could be wrong, and then with Franco, they were trying to reform the economic output of Spain by changing the culture a little bit, by saying, hey, like, don't run around after other
Right.
women, like work is prayer. God expects you to produce, like,
Interesting.
working hard is not materialism. I could be off, that
Yeah.
I hate making observations about something I'm not a part of because you don't know it from the inside, other
Yeah.
countries, religions, ethics, whatever, ethnicities, but that was my outside observation of that kind of thing. So like you go in and like there's a problem with the society and you have to refine the value system.
Yeah.
Or you maybe don't have to, but that's somebody had that idea and it seems to have worked in numerous cases.
Absolutely. It makes total sense.
So, but that would be what, the Torah?
Okay, so that is the Torah. So the Bible is the Torah. The Old Testament is the Torah. The first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and another one, I think Numbers, are the Torah. And they're considered to have been written by Moses. Then there's 2 other sections of the Bible, the prophets, and there's another section, I forget what it is. But those first 5 books are the Torah. They start the Bible, and they're the 5 books. And every year in a synagogue, they have it timed, I think, to 52 readings. How could that be in just 52 weeks? They must read it every day in a synagogue, so that in 1 year, they read the whole Torah every year.
Including all the stuff about the quality of the grain?
Whatever's in those first 5 books.
Okay. Yeah, it's in there.
I'm going to have to double
definitely not
check
gotten
that.
past the first
It does seem like that's a lot of reading every day because it's dense.
Maybe they abridge it.
Maybe. I'm going to look into that. But that's what I've heard is that every year they read the whole Torah, which isn't the entire Old Testament. It's just the first 5 books of the Bible.
But the Talmud, what is that?
The
how
Talmud
does that plug in?
Completely different. And there's 2 Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and I think they call it the Jerusalem Talmud. There's 2 Talmuds that are much, much later. And you read different dates, but the Talmud is rabbis commenting on the Torah or on the rest of the Bible. And it's huge. It's like 68 volumes. It's divided into 10 sections because a lot of the Bible's pretty vague. Like, what does that mean? If you ever read the Bible, it's like...
I'm Catholic. I get the whole interpreting the Bible thing. That's why I have to read it myself. I've never read it.
Somebody has to explain it and decide how to enumerate these laws and adjudicate these laws in real terms. Like, here's a society trying to follow the Torah. What does it mean that I can't shave my head, or I can't do this, or I'm supposed to do that? How does that work out into our situation in this daily life? So the Talmud has a lot of that, and it has a lot of legends. But what I discovered that really surprised me, because I always wonder, like, why do they care about the Talmud? It's just a bunch of rabbis. It's not Moses. It's not the Bible. It's not the thing. Is that Orthodox Jews and ultra-Orthodox Jews consider the Talmud to be oral Torah, meaning Moses spoke it. He didn't write it. He spoke it. And it got passed down orally for 10 centuries. Yeah, it's really kind of weird.
So they think that the Torah is less accurate than the Talmud?
No, the Torah is number one.
Okay.
That's the most important thing.
Even though the Talmud can contradict the reading on its face of the Torah.
The Talmud must have contradictions because there's different rabbis interpreting the Torah, but they sit and they argue about it. You know,
I mean, certainly if you look at the Catholic Church, or I get a little flack for saying I'm Catholic, I didn't read the Bible. Like, I know it gets read to me when I go to church, and I do read it and I understand, but I also do appreciate the interpretation and the millennia of writing and reflection by people smarter and better educated than I am. It's not for everybody, and Catholics and Protestants will make fun of me for this either way. But anyway, so you have disputes among Christian sects, including Catholicism, about the true meaning of the Bible. And similarly, the Supreme Court, some of them, I would say the Constitution is clear on its face. And if you have any questions whatsoever, they wrote down what they were thinking at the time. But even at the time, you have the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers. Like, some of them you could interpret it in different ways. And some people today, I think in good faith, like, some of those cases are a little hard to take a case and decide, this nuanced set of facts, how exactly does it fit within the Constitution? So I can see the value and the argument surrounding teasing out the real meaning of the Torah.
Exactly. That's partly what the Talmud is. Exactly. It's exactly it. And what shocks me is that it's taken as Moses, it's taken as Scripture.
Gospel.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to come up. It's gospel truth.
Take it as gospel. Funny. Okay, so all right, but so then what is the Kabbalah?
Okay, Kabbalah. Oh, and by the way, the Talmud was written at the time of the Gnostic sects, when Gnosticism was at its peak, around
what?
3rd century. Common Era.
Post, like Irenaeus, that era, right? Where
the Talmud
the creed together.
Way later than the Torah.
Oh, way later.
Yeah.
Oh, it could then be reactionary.
Century, Common Era.
Could be reactionary.
The Talmud's a whole other crazy thing, and there's tons of it, and there's a lot of weird stuff in it. I'm sure there's a lot of great stuff in it, like how to resolve these disputes. Let's live in peace. Let's resolve these disputes. Here's the book. You can get the book and read it. Again,
can you get it in English?
Yes, you can. It's not occulted, and it's there. Of course, it is obscure, and these libraries. But that's what the rabbis are doing. If you see the Hasids, especially, they're reading the Talmud.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they're reading the Talmud, and there's a certain shape to it where there's a section. of the Torah, and then there's commentary by the different rabbis. And at a certain point, they ended that, and the Talmud was done. And that's what they're studying, all the Hasidic, especially the Hasidic sect are studying that Talmud. And that's when, a lot of rabbis, and they're debating the Talmud, and they're scholars. And that's the most important thing to them, the Torah and the Talmud. But the Hasidics also jumped on the Kabbalah.
Okay, now really, because I'm from Rockland County, which I believe has the highest Hasidic population. But it's kind of like New York City has more Irish than Ireland, than Dublin, and Italians or whatever. But I think that Rockland County, probably rivals Israel with the population of Hasidic.
Probably.
So, but I did not know that about, especially did not know that they had anything to do with the Kabbalah, which I kind of felt, and I think you said too, is, has moved beyond being in the realm of Jews alone, that it's, because I've seen Ashton Kutcher wear a Kabbalah thing, Madonna. It's downright trendy.
Kabbalah is a really fascinating topic. And there's not just one Kabbalah, there's lots of Kabbalah. It's generally agreed that it was written in the 1200s in Spain, and also southwestern France, like that whole area straddling the Pyrenees. And that part of France, of France was where the Cathars were, who were Gnostics. And that's when the Albigensian Crusade, when the church wiped out the Gnostics, was that same area where the Kabbalah came from.
Wait, now you're starting to run into where the Templars were on the run, right?
Yeah, now we're getting into that.
Oh, but no, we got to tell me where the Kabbalah is. What is it?
So Kabbalah is pure mysticism. It's pure stories about. It's a hoax, actually. It's another hoax. Part of it, the Kabbalah written by what's his name, Moses. In Spain, he pretended that it was a 2nd century rabbi, like around the time the Talmud was written. One of those rabbis, and he was writing stories about them, and it's kind of Platonic, where there are 3 people walking and talking and discussing events, and it's filled with the supernatural and supernatural events that are really hard to read. I really can't read it very well. My brain goes to mush because there's absolutely no logic.
Really?
There's nothing street level, it's nothing you can sink your teeth into, or no psychology or character development. It's just these fantastical stories that are kind of fun. And eventually they work in reincarnation. It's real sexy. Women are brought back in. It kind of reinstalls women into Judaism. And in a certain sense, it makes Judaism a lot more fun and interesting rather than just laws.
And does it involve behavior or an opinion on the Messiah?
Yeah, they totally believe in the Messiah. That's a really good question. But it involves getting knowledge. There's all these meditations they believe in that around the Hebrew letters, that the Hebrew letters are more than just letters. They're these kind of cosmic significances. And that if you meditate on the letters and even sometimes imagine them having sex and do these breathing exercises, you can gain contact with God. So in that way, it's very Gnostic. That's what the Gnostics believe. Special exercises, probably drugs. You experience God and you gain gnosis. So it's very Gnostic in that way.
The drugs. I bet ayahuasca probably falls into Gnosticism. Interesting.
Well, one of the sacred plants of the Freemasons is a psychedelic plant called acacia. And apparently that's a hallucinogen. And that's one of the sacred plants of Freemasonry, and it's in the Bible. And there are these theories that, there's the mushroom theories of Jesus, that Jesus was handing out mushrooms.
They're going to legalize mushrooms real soon.
Yeah. And they're pushing the mushrooms again.
Pushing them. I was in an elevator recently and I heard people talking about microdosing, like people my age. I was like, okay, you guys are definitely, you read a memo. You don't even know.
Yeah. Someone told me their niece microdoses.
Yeah. Like
People
5 more
doing it.
people will tell you this in the next month now that you're like aware of it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I didn't know the mushroom theory of Jesus is like he taking it, or are the people who are seeing fish and loaves come
I
out of
don't know.
nowhere
I
and take
never read it. It got real popular for a while.
it? Right.
So people are really serious about it. You do find that mushrooms all over the world.
I can see how the Kabbalah then would be interesting, sexy, amusing. That does not like
Yes.
that kind of stuff doesn't make me think like Hasidic.
Well, the Hasidics are really kind of sexual, and they were criticized at first for having
Because they
too
look
much fun.
asexual.
They do, but they're not. They can't touch their wives for 2 weeks of the month because it's almost like the religion of the fear of the menstrual blood. Like there's one line in the Bible about stay away from your wife at that time.
Yeah, I think the wives got together and put that in there. Like,
Well, they did find PMS in the Bible. Did you hear
oh,
about
no
that?
way.
Yeah, scholars decided at that line, Mary rode Joseph's ass all the way to Bethlehem. About PMS.
Very funny, very cute. I met a donkey yesterday, and sure enough, she had a big brown cross on her back.
Really?
And it was really reminded me of the Bible story that they say that the cross is on the back because they rode the ass to Bethlehem. But I didn't hear that. I think that might borderline blasphemy. I'm going to have to figure that one out. Okay, so all right, so that may be why it's appealing to people, but is it?
Let me just say this, the most famous scholar of the Kabbalah, he kind of rediscovered the Kabbalah. His name is Gershom Scholem. There's a great book about him called Stranger in Paradise, which is a quote from the Bible. He called Kabbalah the return of the mythic, and that Judaism kind of tried to strip all that away and just tell stories from Abraham to Ruth to Jacob to Isaac. This is Judaism. There's very little myth. There's the creations, Adam and Eve. Yeah. But there's very little myth. These are stories of us, and then it crept back in. It's kind of like you can't keep it away.
So maybe what we were talking about earlier with the Torah, maybe it was curated after all. Maybe it wasn't laying bare. Maybe that's what they're saying.
I don't know, but the Kabbalah also immediately started getting used for magic, in that you could talk to angels. That was kind of a big part of the Kabbalah.
But it's a hoax, you say?
Well, the actual beginning of it was a hoax. These stories of a rabbi in the Middle East walking around and having these debates. It was not written in the 200s. Right. It was written in the 1200s. It was said to be written in the 200s, but it was written in the 1200s because it would sell more. If you had this document's 1,000 years old, you need to read it. The great rabbi wrote it, but it turned out it was just a guy wrote it in Spain. But there was this whole mystical movement going on in Spain and France amongst the Jews and amongst everyone, amongst the Gnostics, amongst the Christians. And it immediately became Christian Kabbalah. This guy, Raymond Lull, Lull, grabbed onto it and immediately said, oh, that's Christian. And he used Kabbalah to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. And he tried to convert Jews with the Kabbalah because it had come up through Christianity and Platonism and numerology. So it's where the numerology starts, is with Kabbalah.
Oh my gosh.
And there are these things called Sephiro and these 10 Sephiro and these paths. And it kind of tries to describe the structure of the world and the structure of the universe. And it's kind of Gnostic because the Ein Sof, the head God, the creator God, is very distant. And that's what Gnostics believe, that the God of this world is one God, but there's another God who's so distant, he's not really involved. He doesn't know what's going on here. That's why there's evil here, because the real God doesn't know, because this other God, it's almost like this God, Yahweh, is tricking the real God. And it's almost like a Lucifer guy, like he made his own world over here. Mm-hmm. And that's why there's evil, because he's not the real God. So in a lot of ways, Gnosticism is an attempt to explain evil in the world, which is a tough one. It's this incredibly beautiful world. Why is there evil? Still a debate today. All the great philosophers have kind of weighed in on it. And, from Plotinus, the Neoplatonists, and Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, what is evil? Why is it evil?
I want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
I feel like when my brother died, we thought of AIDS at the time, but my mother and I, and he all now think, well, he's dead. But before he died, we all realized we thought it was the drugs, AZT. But my mother's like, why did God create AIDS? Like, why would that even exist? Why do mosquitoes exist? Why does malaria exist? And I remember saying, like, if you're going to have a closed system that's super complex, things need to be able to grow and change. And if you're going to have free will, you need to be able to choose. And like we were talking before, right? I was mentioning about like the Constitution or the Talmud and the Torah. Like if something is so complex that you can actually, and Gnosticism, in all honesty, disagree with what it really means, what its impact will be going forward, that adds some nuance into the system that allows it to grow in its complexity. But still, it would, you're going to make wrong choices. And then you can have people who just spin off and say, oh, wrong choices, if I don't have to suffer the consequences, might benefit me. So I guess that would be like the definition of evil is making those wrong choices. But I don't have as much of a problem with the fact that God made angels with free will and the possibility of making wrong choices just to allow, a perpetual world of choice. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
I'm just trying to formulate that.
Apparently it's partly to challenge us, to give us choice. Apparently angels don't have that. Like, by confronting evil, we become greater than the angels because the angels don't have to confront evil.
But Lucifer was evil, right? Or became evil or whatever, chose evil.
Lucifer, he rebelled against heaven.
But maybe the rest of them learned their lesson. That was the convincer. Don't be doing that. Nobody else is going to get away. It's like the flood. Like, nobody else is getting to do that. Like, this is the only time I will ever allow this.
The Lucifer story is fascinating. Lucifer means light, and the light bringer. And Prometheus was who made humans, and he was punished by Zeus. So Prometheus and Lucifer.
He gave the fire. Did he make humans or just gave the fire?
He actually made humans out of dust. It's a really interesting myth that I need to reread, and it was Prometheus and I think Epimetheus, and one means foresight, one means insight. I think they made humans together and then gave them fire, and that was the last straw because now they could be like gods, and Zeus was pissed. And that's the same as the serpent in the garden. He said, you will know good and evil if you eat the apple. You won't die, but you can become as a god. So the Lucifer, Prometheus, and the serpent are all kind of intertwined, and that's why the Gnostics worship the serpent.
I was going to say, what's with the serpent being good?
Yeah. Well, the serpent was always a symbol of regeneration and wisdom because they could shed their skin and grow, like what you were just saying. They can grow and change within this life. So they had this special power. So they got associated with wisdom in the ancient mystery religions. And then every religion would take the previous religion and try to make it evil so that you come with this religion. So the snake was bad in Judaism, but I think that came out of Zoroastrianism too. There's a huge chunk of Zoroastrianism in Judaism.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because Zoroastrianism is, as far as I know, the oldest continuing religion. It's the foundational, like I was talking to some Iranians, Persians, whatever, and they were saying they're Zoroastrian. I know a couple who are Zoroastrian. They said that Islam is an invasive religion.
Yeah, absolutely.
In Iran. And I never thought that Zoroastrianism would loop around back to Judaism.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the source of a lot of the myths in Judaism. Definitely. I think that's a settled question. Their creation myth, the Adam and Eve story, is almost identical to Zoroastrians.
Okay, so you've mentioned a few times myths, hoaxes,
Yeah.
but also magic. And
Yeah.
and I mentioned, like, I asked people, do you think prayer has an impact on earth? Like, that to me gives me an insight into their like
Why?
spiritual view of the
Uh-huh.
universe. Do you think there's magic? And I think I might have asked you
Yes.
this before, but like, are people doing magic, or is the magic a mind control device? Does it really have an impact other than how it influences people's beliefs?
Well, I believe in prayer. I believe in magic in the sense of your focused intent probably can change the future. I really do. I think we don't end at our skin. We do control to some extent our destiny by what we desire. I think desire does help form the world, and you have to be really careful what you're thinking because thoughts are energy. And you do create your reality by how you feel and think. And in one way, that's a given. You can choose to get bent
Right.
out of shape by somebody's passing rudeness and, be angry. You could choose to forget it and enjoy the day. So you did create your reality
Yes,
right there
yes.
by your choice of feeling. And if you do that consistently, it's obvious. If you set your mind on something, you are going to get it one way or another. So, and whether there's angels helping or extra metaphysical things, I think probably so, because I'm a big fan of near-death experiences.
Yes, I did want to ask you about that.
Yeah, big fan of near-death
Yes, tell
experiences.
me about that.
It's gotten really popular in the last 40 or 50 years, but the very first one in literature is in Plato. It's
Nice.
it ends the Republic, which is a book about justice. What is justice? What is the ideal city? How do we live? How do we make an ideal city? It's kind of like, a Bible for making an ideal city. Instead of strict rules of right and wrong, which the Jews did, it's philosophy. How would this work? How would that work? How should children be raised? What should art be like? How does the army work? It's all through the Republic, and it's aimed at justice. And at the end, they can't really decide what justice is, because maybe justice for one person is different than the other. But the very end of the Republic, it's called the story of E-R. Socrates tells the story of a soldier who was slain on the battlefield. And it took them like a few days to gather the bodies. And it was strange because his corpse had not rotted. It was like 10 days. His corpse hadn't rotted, but still they had to put it on the funeral pyre to burn it like all the other bodies. And they put it on the pyre, and the body woke up.
Oh my gosh.
And he had a story to tell.
Nice.
Yeah. It's the first recorded near-death experience. And he told this amazing story. You have to read it. It includes Ulysses is in it, who's getting his new life. And it's about reincarnation. It's about a field that he saw where some people were going up to the good place and some people were going down to the bad place. And other people were coming back from the bad place.
Oh, purgatory, my favorite.
And people were coming down from the good place, and they were mingling, and they were telling stories about how wonderful the good place had been or how horrible the bad place has been. But they're all camping in this field, and they're all there to choose their next life. And somebody goes around and throws lives out on the field, and then somebody goes around and they randomly draw a number. And the person who draws number 1 gets to go out in the field and pick a life. And it goes on like that. And he said it was really weird because some people who came from the good place chose a bad life, and they decided to become tyrants that would, create hell on earth for people. The Greeks are very concerned with tyranny and tyrants, and that they could choose this life. And why would they choose that bad life? He didn't know. Because these near-death experiences create as many questions as answers they solve. Because, how does the next world work? If that's how this world works,
Yeah.
how does the next world work? And he told this great story. He said he saw Ulysses, who got a late number. He got a very high number. And Ulysses describes Ulysses as looking over all the lives really slowly and carefully. So this is Ulysses who had gone to war, you know, and the Iliad and the Odyssey. He came back with this crazy 10-year, you know, Odyssey. And he's next life. He finally found what he wanted, which was just a farmer, just a regular guy with a little farm. So he goes, this is what Ulysses says. He goes, if I had been number one, this is the life I would have picked. I just want to have a quiet life.
Perfect.
And he tells that story. It's more complicated. There's come to some structural thing of
But gets to choose his own life again?
You know, he doesn't say no, because he comes back to life. He's not done. He's not done with this life.
Okay, so he just faded out off the field and got sucked back in. Because every time you read those stories, yeah, like somebody like gets like the machine that goes in the ER, there's and
he gets sucked back in
life.
And tells the story.
Yeah.
So the great republic of Plato and Socrates of what is justice is that, you know, justice is in the next world. Like, you're going to go to the good place or you're going to go to the bad place. And how Christian is that? You know, that's how Platonism influenced Christianity, but they left out the reincarnation.
The meditations is super Christian too. And even the Yoga Sutras are absolutely Christian. So universal truth. But they left out the reincarnation. So do you believe in reincarnation into this life, or do you believe in like the afterlife of a next, you know, of a different dimension? Do you think that I have another electromagnetic existence ahead of me?
Yes, I do. I totally 100% believe in reincarnation. I don't think life makes sense without that. I think the struggle to be happy and to be moral and virtuous, but happy too. You know, you've got to go out there. You're going to cause some pain in the world inadvertently. You know, you just don't have time to make everyone happy. You're going to hurt feelings. It's hard for me to explain this sometimes to my daughter. You're going to hurt people's feelings. You make mistakes.
You make mistakes. I need that speech because I get super nervous when I hurt people's feelings. But you are going to make mistakes. You got to forgive yourself for that too. Just honest mistakes.
And it's hard. It's a challenge. And maybe I'll just go to a monastery and pray in my room, because
that's what I think. Like, if you really believe, then like I'm dropping everything and I'm going to go to cloister. I'm just going to pray the entire time. I knew a banker who was hardcore, like capital markets guy, where apparently like you are carefully craft the truths that you present to the outside world. Like you're constantly juggling, telling one person one piece of the puzzle, another person the other piece of the puzzle.
Interesting.
It's a cutthroat kind of game. But I had found out that he had been in a seminary before and dropped out. And this was a super huge guy, big guy.
Wow.
Not physically, but like he was a super important guy. I shouldn't even been like, I should avert my eyes like passing Bob Dylan in the hallway. But I stopped and I said, "Oh, I've been thinking about you." Okay, that's weird. And I was like, no, it gets weirder. This is what I think. I think that you used to really believe in God, and you were just like, well, if you really believe in God, like you have to dedicate your life to God, because just doing the math, infinity of paradise is going to outweigh anything you can accomplish on this. And then you started having doubts, and you were like, I'm not willing to risk that. I want infinity of paradise here immediately. And he was just like, you really need to. You need to have more things to occupy your mind than
you have too much time on your hands.
Yeah. And but I think I was right.
Yeah,
I think I was right about that. You've got to. But how do you reconcile that with Christianity, or do you not?
I don't. I mean, I guess I'm not a Christian because I believe in reincarnation. And I also
do you think someone can believe that Jesus was the Son of God and also believe in reincarnation, or does it contradict what he said? Did he ever say you can't have a couple of intervening lives?
He never mentioned it, but there are hints of reincarnation in the Bible
well, he was reincarnated. No, he had the same incarnation, right? His same
body. John the Baptist was. They mentioned John the Baptist. It was Elijah once.
So Jesus was resurrected, not reincarnated.
Jesus was
sorry.
Right.
Sorry. I mean, I have people listen who know like a lot more than this
Oh yeah,
than me
yeah.
about this stuff. So I hate to step on toes, but yes. So,
But the symbolism is there that he conquers death. Like there is no death. So your soul lives on. And that's the primary symbolism of Christianity, which frankly doesn't really exist in Judaism. There's very little mention of the afterlife in Judaism, which is odd. That's a huge difference between Judaism and Christianity. Christianity is really focused on the afterlife. Judaism's focused on this life. That's why I have so many laws and rules to make this life harmonious. But they really believe that their bones will come out of the ground and their actual bodies as they are now will live again on this earth.
Well, that is a Christian. That's why we weren't allowed to get cremated, and they are not allowed to get cremated. Jews are not allowed to be cremated, and Catholics weren't either. And now all of a sudden they are, which But the idea is all things are possible with God, so it doesn't.
Right. It doesn't matter.
They don't want you scattering the ashes because I guess that's just too.
That's going too far for God. I can't find those ashes.
God does not have time for that. Oh shoot, you're not allowed to joke about God at all. That's first commandment thing.
Well, no, we're joking about people.
Yes, who think
don't believe in God enough. We're making fun of the people.
See?
Yeah.
I know. You know which way is up. Okay, so, well, I like to be sensitive to people's time, but given that what we were talking about, is there anything that you feel we did not hit that is appropriate for this episode? I also want to do, like, the next time you do an episode, we're doing an episode.
Awesome.
So we can save it for that.
We can talk about Hamlet.
Oh, Hamlet. I have to read that. My son is into Shakespeare now. So he walks around doing like soliloquies, and he has to write three additional scenes for Much Ado About Nothing. So he keeps practicing with me. Like, I guess,
that's a cool project.
I know. So he's trying to say like, who are you? I didn't even read the play, but I'm getting
read that one.
Who are you to think that how did you not know she was like not virtuous or whatever, like behind the scenes talking to try to reconcile like their taboos and their what we consider sexist ideas with similar things in this day and age. But yes, I haven't done Hamlet. He has been reciting soliloquies around the house, so I should get to that one too. But yeah, we can talk about that. But your most recent one did hit. I mean, we literally just skimmed the surface of what you got into.
Kabbalah is so dense that the book is the Rosicrucian Enlightenment and the Occult in Elizabethan England. There's a very famous scholar, Frances Yates, a woman who wrote about the Renaissance, and she kind of reintroduced Kabbalah again. And she thinks Kabbalah, which did immediately get associated with magic, and immediately split off, and immediately went all over Europe and started getting used for magic rituals somehow, and wound up in England, but also first stopped in Italy. And she thinks it had a lot to do with loosening up Christianity and even creating the Reformation, because all these new ideas came in that were considered to be Christian. And they argued that Kabbalah is actually Christian. Kabbalah reinforces Jesus. So it swept through Europe about 250 years after it was first written, and it also went to the Middle East from Spain when the Jews were kicked out of Spain and settled in the area of Israel. And a couple famous guys got a hold of it, Isaac Luria, the Lion, Ari the Lion, and then Sabbatai Sevi, and then Robert Frank, and now all the way to the Hasids. But it seemed to make people believe they were the Messiah. It's a little bit like drugs. It's a little bit like LSD in that regard, is that it seems to make people go a little over the top. And Sabbatai Zevi went like completely crazy and created this massive cult with millions of followers who believed he was the Messiah. And he was just, they decided he was just bipolar and manic and did too much Kabbalah.
Yeah, you could probably see superhuman when you have that kind of over the top.
And I've
seen a little of that during lockdown in LA.
Exactly. You start to think you're superhuman, and I don't know. I mean, it's just too vast a topic. I finally had to drop it. There's tons of stuff on YouTube. It's became a big part of Freemasonry. It's very revered in the occult world. It was just in Ireland, and there was a William Butler Yeats exhibit, and he drew his own Kabbalah Sephiroth, the 210 Sephiroth, and they study these pathways between these energy centers, mercy and judgment and severity and beauty. It's almost like the structure of God in this world, and it really excites people because they think they're getting close to God.
What I love about and I will leave it at this, what I love about your podcast is that you're so well read. You've got so many resources at your fingertip. I honestly get the sense that you've read most of these books. Unlike me, I read a couple of chapters, I'm like, I got it. I'm skipping to the last chapter. I know, but a lot is missing. I just don't have
it's hard to have the time now.
Yes,
Twitter.
Yes. And there's life is, I really feel like our level of production in this life is in this, right now, that economic powers that be is meant just like the progressive tax rate or some idiot troll on Twitter is meant to just take your time up so that you can't get deep into a subject. And that
interesting.
What you do is invaluable in that you synthesize all this. And at the same time, because you have thoughts. You're not like a strict historian. You have thoughts. It's not a pot boil. It's you glean conclusions and you share them, but you give all the facts. It's really a pleasure. You're the only person I can say this about. I always listen to every one of your shows twice, every single one.
Wow.
Oh, yes,
thank you,
absolutely.
Monica.
Yes, definitely true.
Wow.
So highly recommend. And I haven't recommended it to anyone who hasn't loved it. So
wow, fantastic.
So yeah, it's true.
Thank
and I remember the first time I met you was before you even had a podcast.
Yeah. And I remember saying to you, I'm really interested in Gnosticism. You remember that?
I don't know. You told me what you were doing. You were working on a podcast, and I was like, okay.
No,
and then
I was just not yet.
Or something.
I just wanted to know about Gnosticism. And somewhere in there, it hit me what I needed to do. Yeah, but I did say that to you that night. Yeah.
Beautiful job. And I absolutely, as I think I might have said off the air here, but I adore the velvety ear feel of your show. I think you must have some recording background because you're just licking the eardrums there. I love that. That's just my favorite feeling.
You're too kind.
Oh, no, it's true. I'm not. It's true. And I really appreciate your time and sharing. Always, you spend as much time with me and giving my listeners a show as you spend in your final product. But I know that your final product is the result of months of distillation. So it's fantastic.
No, thanks.
So can you please, in your own words, tell people how best to listen to you and support your work?
Just do a search. You can go to thehiddenlifeisbest.com. I have a website that I had to transfer, so it's not as good as it was. It needs work. I'll get onto that. Or you can go to Apple Podcasts or Spreaker or wherever. You should be able to easily find it. Either The Hidden Life is Best or Francis Bacon and the Gnostic English Empire. The Hidden Life is Best is one of Francis Bacon's slogans that he wanted to be hidden because he could create more power that way.
Which is perfect for his Gnosticism in a way.
Yes, and because he had to stay hidden then because you could only be Christian then. You were getting big trouble.
Unthinkable.
Tried to start another religion. And there were no Jews in England at that time. They had been kicked out in 1292, and they weren't allowed back in till after Cromwell. So it's just a great story that intertwines with so many things. And if you're interested in religion, it's great for comparative religion and history. But
now, how can people help your cost of creating that awesome ear feel?
I would love some donations. I may have to do the Patreon thing. I was getting a lot of donations, but I think I might have to do the extra episode. I don't know. I have to figure something out to try to get some an income stream, if only to pay the bills, related to it. And
right. When I used to actually hope to get my actual time compensated for, since I always had to hire a babysitter, and now I don't really need so much babysitting. So I'm like, if I can just cover the production costs, I think I'll get, no one in this house will notice what I'm up to, but when it starts going red, it's like, So I do understand, everybody, if somebody listening really enjoys it, give $100. Like
Yeah, there's
that'll take
PayPal.
care of a lifetime of contribution for one thing. But
That'd be great. Go to on the website. There's a PayPal donate button. That would be wonderful.
And there's show notes there, and I will put comprehensive show notes in this show on monicasdeepdives.com, which you might like, Robert.
I'll check it out.
And thank you very much for being here, Robert Frederick of the Hidden Life is Best podcast. And thank you all for listening to Deep Dives with Monica Perez.